By the 19th century, the English public had already cultivated a long-standing fear of the undead. Around the 11th century, the common folklore of English people held the belief that an uncorrupted corpse was a sign of evil. Methods dealing with the undead involved physical and spiritual means. The most notable and usual method was to dig up the suspected person, mutilate it, sometimes including decapitation, and burn the body. According to an account written by William Parvis of Newburgh in the 12th century, there were tales of revenant corpses in Buckinghamshire that could only be quelled from their haunting of the living by burning their body to ashes. Another author of horrid reanimation tales of English old was Walter Map. His book, Courtiers' Trifles, regaled readers with happenings of evil men dying and coming alive again in the night to stalk the town and spread a pestilence, only to be stopped after their bodies were dismembered and their bones burned. Before the widespread hold of the Catholic Church had come to fruition, old folklore of the English peoples held the belief that an uncorrupted corpse was a sign of evil. And while the Catholic Church tried to recontextualize the undead to fit and strengthen their monotheistic structured beliefs, as the Enlightenment approached, other parts of Europe towards the east held fast to the old culture. The Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason, began in the 1700s. Scholars, writers, politicians, gentlemen, ladies of high society, and other voiced intellectuals began criticizing and turning away from their culture's long-standing relations with religion and mysticism, among other things, in favor of embracing science, human reason, and its application to religion by way of skepticism, atheism, and materialism. Some say the Enlightenment was a direct result not only of the political climate of the times, but of the sudden influx of superstitious stories from Eastern Europe. Stories about dead husbands, friends, and neighbors returning from the dead to terrorize their loved ones. Local government officials were inundated with requests to investigate. Newspapers began running these sensational stories daily, with cases of vampire happenings in Prussia, Bulgaria, Hungary, Russia, and more, the newspaper journalists themselves vying for who could get the most grotesquely descriptive details. This sensational, emotive-driven approach later became a marker for the Romanticism period that followed, where people, and therefore art and literature, began rejecting the ideas of the Enlightenment period in favor of the subjective, irrational, imaginative, emotional, and personal. It can be seen in the subject matter of the penny bloods that arose at the tail end of Romanticism, where tales centered society being afflicted by the outrageously horrible and violent marauders and other unscrupulous types. Most of all, those tales of night-stalking ne'er-do-wells spawned from true-life crimes. The penny bloods starring highwaymen and footpads of the last 2 centuries themselves being the life and times of real bandits who were prevalent stories in the English news. It seems that news reports on current events and true crime were the fuel to the penny fire. Could it be that penny blood writers optimized on the unpredictable and horrific nature of real life and expounded on it? Take the well-known story of Peter Blagojevich, the Serbian peasant man. His case was published in a Viennese newspaper. After his death in 1725, his family and neighbors also began to fall ill with what was then known as consumption and subsequently die. While they lay dying, they told witnesses that they had been throttled in the night by the then dead Blagojevich. His wife even made the statement that her husband Peter had come to her in the night asking for his shoes. It was also recorded that he visited his house once more, approached his son, and demanded he get him food. His son refused and was later found dead, presumably after being fed on by Blagojevich himself. These conversations, exposing the wanting of possessions and offerings from the living, this covetous nature strikes a parallel to a scene in a Penny Blood chapter of Varney the Vampire, in which Varney approaches Flora and asks for the house she and her family are residing in to be sold or given to him. Varney approaches his initial target, Flora, and tells her that he wants Bennerworth Hall. He impresses to Flora that he must have it and will have it, although his path to it be through a sea of blood. As Blagojevic's requests were rejected by both his wife and son, he, much like Varney, consumed with this vampiric, avaricious nature, felt left with no choice but to kill those who sought to deny him his own desires. Much like thriller authors of present day, the writers of Penny Blood seem to use deep-seated fears placed by familiar legends, real-life concerns, and the public sensitivity towards them as emotional catalysts for the thrilling text that sadistically captivated the people. It begs the question, were Penny Bloods in some way the modernization of the old traditions and beliefs? And if so, is their proximity to reality what made them so dangerously thrilling? A report by medical physician and officer of the Austrian Royal Army, John Flukinger, was published in 1732. Its title, Seen and Discovered. This publication is said to be the spark that sensationalized the vampire mania in Western Europe. The reports began centered around the infamous Arnold Powell. By the time Flukinger had arrived to investigate, the small village Powell resided in was in a state of collective panic and fear for their lives. The deceased Powell was said to have already taken 17 people's lives, young and old, with no previous illnesses, and to have begun plaguing others in town. After exhuming all the bodies of former residents in question of being engaged in vampire activity, Flukinger found them all covered in blood. For Flukinger, the cases kept coming. Powell's haunted successors were one after another, surviving his attacks in the night, only to die 3 days later of an unknown illness. When Flukinger exhumed each of the suspected persons' bodies, he found the same telltale signs: renewed skin and nails, intact internal organs, and fresh blood pouring from their orifices. Flukinger's reports were eventually sent to Emperor of Austria, who examined his findings and then had them published to the public. The report became a bestseller, translated across Europe, and even said to end up in the hands of Bram Stoker. Bram wasn't the first nor the last to draw heavy inspiration from the writings of the past. The descriptive writing in the Penny Bloods of most famed vampire Sir Francis Varney perhaps served as a blueprint of sorts and became a source of inspiration for many movies to come. A tall figure is standing on the ledge immediately outside the long window, its fingernails upon the glass that produces the sounds so like the hail. With hands clasped, a face of marble, a heart beating so wildly in her bosom that each moment it seems as if it would break its confines, eyes distended and fixed upon the window, she waits, froze with horror. No word is spoken, and now she fancies she can trace the darker form of that figure against the window. What strange light it is that gradually creeps into the air, red and terrible. The figure is perfectly white, perfectly bloodless. The eyes look like polished tin, the lips are drawn back. It approaches the bed with a strange gliding movement. She cannot even now say help. The power of articulation is gone, but the power of movement has returned to her. She can draw herself slowly along to the other side of the bed, from that towards which the hideous appearance is coming. But her eyes are fascinated. The glance of a serpent could not have produced a greater effect upon her than did the gaze of those awful metallic-looking eyes that were bent on her face. Crouching down so that the gigantic height was lost, and the horrible, protruding white face was the most prominent object, came on the figure. Her bosom heaves and her limbs tremble, yet she cannot withdraw her eyes from the marble-looking face. He holds her with his glittering eye.